The prince saw the maid crying in the market, and that night he made an unexpected decision. The market opened like a fan under the late morning sun. Canvas awnings striped the street with patches of shadow. Mules stamped and tossed their heads. A boy shouted the price of oranges. The air tasted of brine and dust and warm fruit. Alejandro watched it all from a narrow gap in a carriage curtain. The carriage moved slowly, because the street moved slowly, and because the captain of his guard did not like surprises. A pair of riders kept pace at the rear wheel and at the front step. Their horses blinked. Their hands rested light on the reins. He had learned to look without seeming to look. It was part of the education that fitted him for rooms with polished floors and men who measured their smiles. Yet the market did not require a mask. It could not see him. That was its small mercy and its sin. She stood at a stall of figs and apricots. Her dress was clean but worn thin at the elbows, the color faded by soap. The basket on her arm was sturdy, repaired at the handle by a bit of twine. When she counted out coins, her fingers were red at the knuckles from lye and cold water. She moved carefully with that steady grace of someone used to making space for others. The vendor held up a fig with a split skin and shook his head at her. He said something Alejandro could not hear over the clatter of a wheel. Then he said it again, louder. The words carried now. "Short wait," the man said, tapping the scale. "You'll not cheat me." Her mouth opened, closed. She took a breath. "I counted," she said. "You watched me." His hand swept, careless. A few figs tumbled to the ground and rolled until the gutter caught them. A smear of jam colored the wood edge where one burst. Her shoulders went very still. For a heartbeat, she did nothing. Then she bent and reached, slow, as if the air had thickened. Mud darkened the hem of her skirt. The puddle mirrored a slice of sky. When she straightened, the vendor's face had already turned to another buyer, a richer one in a fresh hat. The crowd's indifference closed, tidy as a door. Alejandro's hands tightened on the curtain. He did not move. He did not speak. His captain shifted in the saddle, a polite cough lost in the noise. She took the coins back from the counter with a touch that made them look heavy. He saw that her nails were cut short, that the pads of her fingertips were a little cracked. The details lodged themselves in him. There had been lessons about tariffs and supply. He knew the price of figs from Valencia and the river tax on grain barges. He had never seen what lye did to skin. When she thought no one would look at her, she slipped a square of crimson silk from her basket and pressed it to her face. It must once have been a scarf. It was too fine for her. It had been darned near the corner. Even clean, it held a deep stain along one edge, a mark that would not lift. The color against her cheek made her look younger and more breakable. "Your Highness," the captain murmured at the window, not loud, not urgent. "We should keep moving." The carriage obeyed its own habit. The coachman had the team in hand. The wheel bumped a rut, and the curtain jittered. He saw her eyes once, quick, an accidental glance in the carriage's direction. She didn't see him. Her gaze snagged on the glare of the glass for a fraction of a second and slid away, embarrassed by a reflection. He should say something, he thought. He should order the captain to stop. He should buy the whole stall and give it to her. He should, what? The curtain fell back into place and the market withdrew. A painted scene rolled up too fast. He sat with the image of her posture burned into him, the precise angle at which she held herself to keep from crumpling. The crimson square glowed in his mind, with the color of blood and fruit, and something he did not have a word for. The carriage cleared the market and took the wider street that led to the palace. He watched the roofs pull past, the sunlight on the tiles, the quick shadow of swallows. He counted arches without knowing he did it. The rhythm of the horse's hooves stitched the minutes together. By the time the carriage passed under the gate into the Alcazar's courtyard, the heat had thinned a little. Oranges drowsed in their trees. Water answered itself quietly from a fountain in the shade. The stones underfoot were cool to the touch where the building held the sun off them. This was a place that taught you what to say before you had the chance to find your own words. He let himself be led through the obligations that waited, because they always waited. A steward presented a stack of correspondence with names written in a neat clerk's hand. A courtier from the provinces requested an audience, urgent, but vague. A cousin of a cousin sent a bottle of sherry and expected a line in return. He made the notes. He smiled, where a smile was a toll. The habit of it should have been a comfort. It was not. The image of the maid tugged at each act, unthreading it. He saw figs on the floor when he glanced at a polished table. He heard a man say short wait when a secretary explained the weather's effect on harvest. He saw a crimson square when he read the red seal on a letter from the capital. "Your Highness?" the steward asked, noticing the pause. "Later," Alejandro said. "Send the replies later." He dismissed his attendants earlier than courtesy required. He walked the long gallery alone, because movement felt like a decision. The afternoon's brightness had softened. Light laid itself along the balustrade in gold sheets. In the tiled courtyard below, a woman's laugh rang once and stopped, as if someone had remembered where they were. He had been taught to walk in ways that meant different things. The pace that brought calm to a tense room. The turn of the head that cut off a dangerous subject without offense. He tried them, and found they did nothing to quiet the noise inside him. What he kept turning back to was not the insult. Men insulted the weak all day without anyone strong to watch them be so small. What held him was the way she made herself small in order to pass through the moment, and the way it showed that her life had taught her to do this often. The sun slid behind a wall. The edges of things blurred and softened. The Alcazar breathed its evening breath of stone and water. He stood at a narrow window and watched lights begin to prick the city. Above the rooftops, a pale smear of smoke suggested bread ovens. Somewhere a dog barked itself hoarse at the idea of a stranger. He remembered being a boy and counting the towers he could see, inventing little games to make time feel like his. He could not remember when he had stopped playing and started waiting for hours to be assigned to him by other people. He felt the moment when his thought clicked into choice. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, like a door closing with a soft sound in a house full of sleeping. He turned from the window before his mind could rehearse all the reasons not to do what he knew he would do. "Captain," he said when the guard stepped into the doorway, "send a runner back to the market, quietly. He is to ask no questions that make noise. He is to buy a basket from the fig seller and see who returns a crimson silk cloth to their basket. He is to follow that person at a distance and learn the street where she lives and the house she serves. Another man to the guild that keeps the ledger of hires. He is to write the name down as if it were routine." The captain did not blink. He had learned to keep his face level even when surprised. "Yes, Highness," he said. "Discretion?" Alejandro looked at him. They had known each other long enough to lay a great many words into a single one. "Discretion," he said. "No names spoken. No talk after. No coins where they can be counted by others." "Understood." The captain's voice was without warmth and without cold. It would carry through a stone wall. "You will be told only when we have the facts." "Tonight," Alejandro said. It was not a question. It was a small defiance of those who believed that urgency belonged only to troops and floods and treaties. The captain left with a nod. He left by the side door that servants used. Alejandro stood and listened for the hoofbeats to vanish. He returned to his study and read the same letter twice without seeing a word of it. The second time he knew he wasn't looking at ink. He set it down and lifted the silver lid on a dish of candied peel, then let it fall without taking anything. His mouth had the taste of market dust. He went to the chapel. He sat where his father had sat when managing a conscience. He did not ask for guidance, he asked for a quieter heart. The request, for once, was denied. The little lamp that burned there shook slightly in a draught from a corridor. The flame made the hammered gold behind it look like water about to spill. A servant came to remind him of a less important habit, a walk in the garden with an advisor who spoke gravely about other men's plans. He stood in the dusk while the advisor talked, the words filing themselves into neat stacks against the wall of the night. He let enough of them land on his face to look dutiful. "Are you unwell?" the advisor asked at last, a shade too concerned. "Only tired," Alejandro said. "It will pass." He did not say of what he was tired. He did not say that a man who has never done anything small by choice will one day find himself looking for a small thing as if all the large things he owns have hidden it from him. When the lamps were lit and the palace became what it always became after sunset, quieter, more polite, more watched, he returned to the study again. A messenger waited just inside the door, his breath steady. He was the sort of man who could stand for an hour and make it look like a minute. The captain's seal on the folded note was enough. Alejandro broke it with his thumb. Inside, a hand that was not the captain's had copied 2 lines, the clipped upright letters of a clerk. The maid had a name. The name carried the shape of a street with it. It belonged to a noble household, a modest walk from the river. He read the name twice. He said it once under his breath to make it real in his mouth. Lucia. It was not magic. It did not change the room. It made the stone around him feel less indifferent. He asked for the roster to be sent, as a matter of routine. It came on a thin sheet with the faint shadow of an earlier list visible beneath the ink. It bore the house's seal and the steward's signature, testy and careful in equal measure. He saw the column for hours worked. He saw the line that named her. He saw another line, small, beside it. A note about the house's expectation of frugality, a reputation wrapped in a euphemism. He felt something in him harden to a point, not anger like a shout, anger that could hold a needle still. He put the sheet down. He reached for the cloak he kept for rain, or for nights when he wished to scent himself with ordinary air. It was plain, cut to hang well on a body that could not hide the habit of standing to be looked at. He buckled it across his chest and found that the action steadied his breathing. At the door, the captain waited again, not astonished and not approving. He had the sense to look like a shadow when he needed to be one. "You will not be recognized, Highness," he said, which was the same as saying you will be recognized if you go where men expect to see you. "I will not be a prince," Alejandro said. "I will be a man who can walk and ask no permission for his feet." The captain did not answer that. He nodded at the guard at the end of the corridor. The man peeled off from his post without a scrape of boot on tile. They moved through a side passage where reliefs of old kings stared out with blank attention. The stone had learned a long time ago to hold its tongue. In the cloister, the air was cooler. Water made a narrow sound. A cat that belonged to no one threaded itself around a column and vanished into a hedge. Alejandro breathed in and out until the breath did not feel like a decision. They crossed a service yard where barrels slept upright. The smell of oil and rope sat low near the ground. A pair of stable boys spoke to each other in soft voices. They did not look up. At the small postern gate that opened into the less observed side street, a guard touched his temple and found reason to study the hinge just then. The captain showed a seal and did not say a word. The gate's iron mouth opened without complaint. Alejandro hesitated with his hand on the wood for the length of a single thought. He let that thought arrive and pass. It said, "You could go back." It said, "You could send someone else." It said, "You could let the palace swallow this, and you off along with it." It did not say what it would cost him to obey. There were no trumpets for the act that followed. There was just the soft sound of leather and wood, the small weight of a cloak, the knowledge of streets, the pressure of a choice in his chest that felt like an ache that might be relief. The captain looked once to either side, measuring the dark. The city beyond the wall held itself like a held breath. Somewhere, far but audible, a cartwheel complained. Somewhere closer, a woman sang 2 lines of a song and stopped, as if listening for someone's answer. Now, Alejandro said. The gate yielded a span of night onto his feet, and he stepped through. The street beyond the gate met him like a second skin. Night held the heat close, but the alleys were cooler, the stones breathing out what the day had stored. The captain set the pace with a small tilt of his head. One guard flowed ahead to read the corners, another drifted behind to erase the sound of their passage. Alejandro kept to the shadow thrown by the walls. At this hour, Seville closed its shutters. Private laughter hid behind wood. A watchman's lantern scraped a yellow circle on the ground and kept moving. They crossed the flank of the cathedral where the buttresses made deeper pools of dark. Somewhere above them, a dove rustled. The city had 1,000 small lives. He felt each one for once, as if it touched him. The bell marked the hour with a low answer. He counted the strokes without meaning to, and found a steadying rhythm. The captain did not speak until they reached the square that flared open without warning, and then narrowed again, as if the houses had exhaled and changed their minds. He stopped only long enough to let a wagon of empty barrels creak past. The driver had a hat pulled low. He did not look up. The iron rims sang against a bump and fell quiet. 2 more turns, the captain murmured. Then the house. They reached a doorway with a brass plate scuffed by years of keys missing their mark. A small rope bell hung at the height of a man who had rung it too often. The captain's knuckles made no sound as they rapped. The sound traveled through wood and into the porter's thin sleep. The porter opened on a chain and peered through the gap with the startled dignity of someone woken on duty. He saw the seal the captain held out, saw the cloak that made rank ordinary, and saw, without naming it, the posture that made ordinary men step aside. Fear and obedience straightened his back. "Inspection," the captain said, the word smooth with long practice. "The charitable laundry sends auditors at odd hours to catch truth. No inconvenience meant to the house." "The house sleeps," the porter said, his mouth already softening into permission. "But the courtyard is clean, the storage is in order, and the servant's ledger sits on its peg. You may look without waking anyone." He removed the chain before he realized he had removed it. The door sighed. They crossed the threshold into air that smelled of soap and hot iron, faded to its memory. The passage ran them past hooks for aprons and a shelf with a row of chipped bowls, each with an initial scratched by some earlier hand. They entered the servants' courtyard, where a single lamp, trimmed low, made the pump handle look like a black arm reaching for help. A tub leaned against a wall. The stone around it was whitened by splashed lye. The neatness of the place had the strained neatness of lives trimmed by other people's edges. On a bench near the pump, a square of crimson silk lay to dry. It was heavy, even empty of water, with that stubborn sheen that clings to fine cloth. The color, even in poor light, pulled the eye. It had been rinsed and wrung without gentleness. Near the corner, a pale mended patch orbited a stain that resisted everything but time. Alejandro stopped 1 pace from it. He did not touch. He did not need to. The same red had rested against a cheek in the market while the world pretended not to see. The captain watched his face and looked away. "Ledger," the captain said to the porter, allowing the word to carry work and not curiosity. The porter hurried to the alcove by the scullery, where a board with pegs held a leather strap and a notebook. He lifted it with both hands, as if it had weight. He offered it to the captain and kept his eyes respectfully on the man who seemed like an inspector, and yet was not one. Alejandro stepped a little aside, letting them perform the ritual. He moved along the wall. He took in the details that a quick glance would not catch. The mop head hung dry and frayed. A spool of coarse thread lay on a sill, a needle pushed through it at an angle that said, quickly, "I will come back to finish this." On a nail, a key dangled, tied with string, as if someone did not trust the hole not to betray them with a lost slip. "Who sleeps nearest the fire?" the captain asked, making it a question about safety. "The younger one," the porter said. "She rises first to make the coals believe in the fire again." He hesitated. "Lucia." Alejandro let the name pass by him without catching on his face. Inside, it caught and held. "Wake the senior maid," the captain said in a tone polite enough to make obedience feel like just another step. "We need her to confirm the assignments for the morning and to answer whether the charity's standards are met." "The mistress will not like an inspection at this hour," the porter warned, testing the limits. "The mistress will not hear of it," the captain answered. "We will be brief." The porter vanished into the passage with a speed that looked like readiness and smelled like fear. A door opened with a small sigh. Feet in slippers made the sound of rain for 2 heartbeats and stopped. Alejandro found himself at the edge of an alcove curtained by a piece of fabric too thin to be anything but kindness to modesty. Beyond the curtain, a pallet lay on bricks to lift it off the damp. A folded garment sat on a box. He saw the stitching along the hem. The thread had been matched badly to the original, out of necessity, not carelessness. The mend was firm and honest. He stood there longer than he meant to. A soft breath rose and fell beyond the curtain. The rhythm had a steady discipline to it, as if even in sleep someone feared to waste air. He listened without moving. The temptation to lift the curtain and put a face to the breath pressed against his chest. He did not move. He looked down at his hands and saw that they were empty. A cough, discreet, from the doorway. The senior maid had arranged herself to be seen and not judged. Her hair was covered by a cap even at night. Her eyes darted to the lamp, to the pump, to the crimson cloth on the bench, and settled with relief on the ledger in the captain's hand. "Forgive the hour," the captain said. "We are here under the seal of the charitable laundry to assess cleanliness and the distribution of labor. Confirmation only. No one is at fault tonight unless the facts insist." The senior maid had learned to read where danger slept. She kept her voice flat. "First light, Lucia for coals and water, then the kitchen for the scullery, then errands if the cook trusts the street with her. Second hour, polishing, the small hall only. Midday, laundry tubs." "Condition of supplies?" the captain asked. "The soap is low," she said, glancing toward the storage. "The salt is not strict enough to fix stains as well as it used to. The mistress says the budget must keep its dignity." "Food stores?" She led them to a narrow room where sacks slumped like exhausted men. The smell of flour woke at the touch. A barrel of oil waited with the patience of things that last. The captain poked, dutiful. He wrote a number that meant nothing and everything. And the ledger? She recited names and hours the way a priest recites beads, without love, with care. "It seems in order," the captain said, and closed the book with a soft authority. "We will note no fault. The charitable laundry will renew its supply without reducing the household's pride." It was a promise with dignity folded into it. The senior maid understood and said only, "Thank you." Alejandro kept silent, letting the inspection breathe through him, letting it be the mask behind which he could look and learn without stealing. A sound of wheels on cobbles reached them from the street. Not heavy, not delivery. The porter stiffened, as if a hand had touched the small of his back. He went to the door and opened it the width of a paused breath. A man stepped into the light with the ease of someone who never knocked, because doors learned to anticipate him. He was not grand in dress, but in bearing. He carried the authority of a different house. The way he looked at the courtyard shifted the air. "From Her Grace," the man said, and the courtyards of Seville only ever had one Her Grace. His tone made the capital letter audible. "A message for the mistress of the house." His eyes swept the scene with the same disinterest a surgeon uses to inventory instruments. They landed on the seal in the captain's hand and recognized its true owner without looking at the face beyond the cloak. They paused for the length of a thought on the crimson cloth drying on the bench. They marked the alcove with the thin curtain as one marks a map. "An inspection," the captain said, mild as rain. "So late," the chamberlain observed, making late mean improper and useful at the same time. "Her Grace takes an interest in the city's generosity as well. She will be pleased to hear of your thoroughness," The captain lifted the seal a fraction, then closed his hand over it. The gesture was simple, the meaning complicated. Alejandro kept his body still. Stilling his body had once felt like control. Tonight it felt like hunger denied. The chamberlain did not push. He handed the sealed note to the porter and tipped 2 fingers as if to a servant who did not need to read the message to obey it. "For the mistress," he said. "It concerns tonight's arrangements and tomorrow's honor." He withdrew with the same unhurried step, but the courtyard did not forget that he had been there. As the door closed, the air adjusted to its previous size and found it was too small now. The senior maid watched the door, her mouth pressed into a line. She did not ask anything. She had the look of someone who would know the content of the mistress's note only when it dropped like a stone into her work. The captain folded the servant's ledger and returned it to the peg. He nodded a polite dismissal to the senior maid, permission granted to sleep again if she could. She left with a soft shuffle of slippers, the kind that carries exhaustion like a child. The porter vanished toward the mistress's staircase with the chamberlain's note held like an accusation that had to be delivered to someone else to be safe. The courtyard held its breath. The lamp threw shadows against the wall that did not belong to anything so soft. The crimson silk shone, defiant in smallness. Alejandro turned toward the bench. He let himself stand at the distance a man would stand from something he wanted to take and could not justify taking. He could smell, faintly, the ghost of orange blossom trapped in the silk's weave, as if it remembered summer and refused to forget. "Highness," the captain said, using the word quick and quiet, a reminder with a warning braided into it. "I am looking," Alejandro said, knowing that look was all he allowed himself. "We have the name," the captain continued, lowering his voice because the courtyard had ears. "We have the street. We can have more by dawn." A door creaked on the far side. A figure moved behind the curtain and then settled again. The sound of sleep changed its rhythm and then returned to its previous discipline. Alejandro felt the pretty stupidity of standing where a man of his position should not stand, wanting what a man of his position should not want to know. He let the feeling shame him into wisdom. "We are finished," he said. "We will not wake the house or disturb its order. Take what we came to take, which is knowledge and nothing else. Then go to the guild." The captain listened to the word guild as if it were a place where knives were kept. "Yes, Highness." "Quietly," Alejandro said, "with the charity's banner over your shoulder and not mine." He stepped back from the bench and folded himself into the role the seal invented. "Your ledger is adequate," he said to the air, for the senior maid to hear as a blessing when it reached her. "Your supplies will be replenished. Your hours will be preserved." The courtyard let him go. Outside, the night had edged toward its thinner hour. The breeze moved differently, dizzy with the thought of dawn. The watchman's call staggered forward and found itself renewed by habit at a new corner. The captain sent the ahead guard into the dark with the kind of hand movement that draws no attention, but empties an alley of danger. They cut through a lane where washing lines, pulled tight, looked like strings of instruments abandoned by invisible musicians. The city at night made its own orchestra. Water in the pipes, a cat's warning growl, the whispered argument of a couple not ready to go to sleep and not willing to stay awake. At the guild that kept track of those who cleaned and carried and kept houses running, one window showed a rectangle of light, like a thin confession. The captain did not knock. He appeared, a fact at the window, and let the seal do its work. A clerk, thin as a quill, opened the door with a stiffness that suggested self-respect learned the hard way. "Inspection," the captain said again. "The charity asks that its names be verified." "The charity asks late," the clerk replied, but his fingers already turned pages. Ink stained his thumb in a way that looked permanent. The captain stood so that his body blocked the clerk's view of the street. He made himself the wall the clerk could lean against, without admitting it. "We require the household roster," the captain went on, "and a note beside the maid we mark." He paused, letting the word maid arrive without explanation. "We are to note any irregular references in her family that might affect her eligibility for charitable assistance. It is kinder to know early." The clerk took this in and accepted it as truth because the alternative was dangerous, admitting that truth might come from elsewhere. He flipped to the page. He traced the line with his nail. He pointed. Lucia Morales, he read, and the name felt like another line of ink on the page of the night. Assigned to the house on San... He stopped himself from finishing the street name when the captain's eyelids lowered a fraction. Assignments as above. Noted for reliability. Family? The captain asked, as if the question concerned only bread. The clerk dipped his pen. He drew a small mark on the margin that meant look again, and then wrote in neat letters. The script of a man whose only rebellion is legibility. Father. Dismissed from the army a few years past, he said flatly, like reading a weather note. Official cause, irregularities in supply, street talk, disloyalty whispered and not proven. The guild does not judge. The guild records. The captain watched the nib. He nodded once. We have heard nothing, he said. We have also heard enough. He left the clerk with a coin placed not as a bribe but as a courtesy to the hour. The coin would be recorded later as a donation to ink and paper. The clerk would sleep. The page would wait with its new mark. The captain returned through the night to where the courtyard and the lamp and the bench with the crimson silk waited with the quiet arrogance of things that will still be there in the morning. He found Alejandro in the shadow line where one could see the door and not be seen by anyone who did not know where to look. It is done, the captain said. We have what we came for and a thread tied to something old. Say it, Alejandro said, already hearing the shape of the answer. The captain's voice carried no drama. Her father was cast out. The reason wears a uniform that looks like duty, but the hem is frayed. There is talk that will not die. Alejandro held the words for a moment. He felt the familiar machinery of state trying to arrange itself around them, to reduce them to a problem to be solved, along with roads and grain. The machinery met something stubborn in him and slid off uselessly. We are not done, he said. We are done for tonight, the captain replied, almost gentle. The house will wake. The city will be itself again. You asked for facts. You have facts. We will make use of them when people with eyes are asleep again. Alejandro's mouth twitched into a shape that was not agreement and not refusal. Dawn is not ours, the captain added quietly. The first light leaked into the lane with that betraying softness that makes darkness look ashamed. A baker's boy ran somewhere, late before he even started. Birds forgot for a moment that they were tired. The tower bell tested its voice with a small clearing of the throat, and then decided to be sure of itself. The first call swung out, not to be argued with. They were back at the courtyard gate when the porter came breathless, with a folded paper held in both hands, as if the weight of it dictated the grip. The seal was not the captain's. It was the other one, the one that invited and commanded at once. He held it out toward the cloaked figure with the careful face. For you, the porter said, before he could stop himself from using a title. From Her Grace's household. The paper made a crisp sound as Alejandro broke the wax. He read quickly, then again, more slowly, and felt the floor of the morning tilt, not for its content only, but for its timing. The note ordered his immediate presence that evening at a charity ball hosted by the Duchess, the very event for which the maid's name had just been added to the service roster. The summons felt like a gauntlet thrown with perfume on it. Alejandro let the paper rest against his palm until the seal cooled, then folded it once and slipped it into his coat. The hour had already begun to sharpen toward evening. The palace moved into its nightly elegance with a soft clatter of trays and a quieting of voices that always made him think of a stage being set. He did not fight the ritual. He stood steady, while the valet drew the dark coat around his shoulders and smoothed the cloth, while a steward spoke of the order of arrivals, while the captain's eyes measured the night ahead without moving from his face. Her Grace will watch, the captain said, letting warning hide inside respect. She always does, Alejandro answered. Tonight she will see me do exactly what is proper. And what is necessary? The captain asked, lifting a brow the width of a thought. Those are different words, he said, not smiling. Sometimes they meet. He dismissed everyone with the smallest lift of his hand and found a breath he could hold without feeling trapped by it. The carriage waited in the inner court. Torches made the horses' flanks gloss. The city beyond the walls threw back light in small, stubborn points. He climbed in, sat, and let the motion carry him toward a house that understood how to make ceremony feel like gravity. The streets near the river wore lanterns like jewels. The mansion that opened its doors to him had arches meant to impress and a staircase that believed in its own purpose. Footmen aligned themselves in a line as straight as a line of soldiers. The Duchess had arranged a ballroom that turned air into lace. Chandeliers held 100 small suns. Music feathered the walls. He stepped into it without haste. People became attendants. Silks bowed. Faces smiled with a calculation he could recite. He gave them the gestures they needed. He gave the Duchess the bow expected of him, and in the angle of his head he gave her nothing else. "Seville is generous tonight," she said, the words tasting of honey and iron. "It takes its cue from you," he replied, the compliment precise and anesthetized. "Your house makes a fair stage." "It prefers to make results," she said, the sentence light and heavy at once. "You have a kind eye, Highness. It notices where others pass by." "Eyes are owed to whoever stands in front of them," he said. "That is the advantage of faces." Her glance slipped a fraction toward the edges of the room, where servants moved like currents in a river you only see when the light hits it right. He did not look. He let his gaze find a quartet of musicians and hold there. "Enjoy the music," she said. "It traveled a long way to be heard this evening." "And may find its journey worth the distance," he returned. They parted with smiles that meant nothing and everything. He took his place near a column where the view allowed for many kinds of attention. He saw the assembly as a map of alliances. He saw, at the margins, the clipped grace of those whose labor made all this possible. He adjusted his stance so that anyone who watched him would think he watched only the dancers. She appeared as a thread in that larger tapestry, the familiar figure made strange by clean linen and a cap that tried to hide hair that refused to be entirely obedient. The apron made her look smaller. The tray made her part of the furniture in other people's hands. He felt his jaw lock and forced it to ease. He reminded himself of the law of ballrooms. No one existed in them except as a reflection of someone else's desire. Lucia's path through the room wrote a pattern only someone with reason to watch would notice. She moved along the edges, taking care to leave space, to anticipate the slight sway of a skirt before it happened, to find the moment a hand might reach and make sure a glass was there to be taken. Her face held the careful nothing of a person who understands that existence can be a provocation in the wrong cheeks. He let his focus narrow to the exactness of her movements. He saw where the tray weighed too heavily and tilted a fraction. He saw how her fingers adjusted, how her forearm bore the brunt of it. He saw the small white crescent scars along one knuckle, badges of other people's evenings. A noblewoman whose rings made her motions clink stopped Lucia with the ease of someone accustomed to arresting what she wanted without resorting to noise. She looked at the tray. She looked at a cloth and found on it a stain that would not exist after 2 washes. "This is a charity ball," the noblewoman said, her voice low enough to be private while ensuring it was not private at all. "We cannot have charity begin at the cost of standards." Lucia kept her gaze on the stem of a glass. "The cloth will be changed at once." "Will it?" The noblewoman tilted her head. "If you are trusted to do it." "It is my task," Lucia said. "Your task," the woman repeated, as if trying the word in her mouth to see if it tasted of something vulgar. "Your task is not to intrude on the evening's light." The cloth sat there, small and suddenly central. Lucia did not reach for it at once. That would have looked like eagerness. She waited a heartbeat, which looked like patience. She lifted the cloth and folded it so that the stain disappeared within the more innocent fabric. A few guests smiled, innocently cruel in the way of those who mistake comfort for merit. Alejandro felt the pulse in his temple quicken. He did not step forward. He did not fracture the social wall he knew too well. When her path brought her to his column, when the tray hovered in front of him like a question he could answer without speaking, he took one of the cotton napkins from the stack she carried, not the finest ones, the honest ones, and laid it down deliberately on the table at his elbow. He set a small silver coin on the corner so the fabric would not slip, a tiny act disguised as thoughtless generosity to the household. He turned his hand a little so the plain glove was visible, not the braided cuff he wore on state nights. He let the gesture be as casual as breathing. Her eyes met the coin because coins rearrange the rules of rooms without lifting a voice. Then her gaze slid up, caught the simple glove, and paused with a flicker of confusion a stranger would mistake for modesty. She moved on. He felt the river of talk shift direction by a degree. The Duchess's allies did not say anything. Saying is not how power moves first. It moves by noticing. He let the music wash his face and pretended to listen. He watched Lucia continue, the tilt of the tray more controlled now, not because the coin mattered, but because someone had chosen to balance something that had been tilted against her. That choice tried to set something right inside him that had hung wrong for years. He breathed. He measured the room again. He calculated how long he could stand there without becoming a story. He decided the time had arrived for a polite absence. He moved with the ease of someone going to inspect a floral arrangement. He paused twice to let a couple pass, to accept a greeting from a man who hoped for a contract, to avoid being rude without giving anyone what they wanted. He found the corridor that led to a smaller hall, then took the stair that servants used because the main one thought too highly of itself to let feet hurry. The air cooled, the music reduced to a suggestion. He counted the steps down. He found the door to the storage by the smell of cloth that had been folded in obedience, and the clean iron tang of polished trays. He closed the door with a care that made no sound. He stood in a room where the work of the house slept until summoned. Bundles sat in labeled stacks to avoid confusion. A single lantern, turned low, drew a circle that was just enough to see by and not enough to be seen through a keyhole. He ran his finger a hair's breadth over the twine around one bundle and then another. He showed himself a patient man in the way he did not pretend patience. A spool of coarse thread sat on a shelf. The needle jabbed into it at the angle he remembered from earlier, a promise of return. He followed his memory to a folded garment at the back of the stack. He recognized the hem's honest stitch. He did not sit. He did not call anyone to do it for him. He slid the garment aside just enough to reveal what the cloth tried to hide and keep safe. His fingers touched paper, the smooth dryness of it a shock in a room of textures meant for skin. He coaxed it free. Wax sealed it, the impression of a crest pressed cleanly into it even after years. He knew the shape. An army division reorganized more than once to clean up after itself. The date in the corner sat like quiet dynamite. It was a year no one in government spoke of without checking first who could hear. Along the margin, in that faint, personal mark that ink cannot mimic, someone had penciled a list of dates, small and careful, and a single word that looked like a hand speaking to itself. Witness. He did not break the seal. He held the letter like an ember that would either scorch him or light the next hour. He heard in his head the rough bureaucratic language he knew too well, all its evasions and all its weight. He felt in his chest the first clean click of certainty he had felt all night. If this document said what its existence suggested, the stain that clung to Lucia's name did not belong to her at all. He allowed himself a breath that had a sound. It was soft, but in the room it felt like a shout. The latch moved. He turned. She stood near the doorway with the stillness of a person who knows that movement can be a crime. Lucia had come for a bundle she was told to fetch, or perhaps for nothing at all, but to occupy a corner where work waited for the next order. The lantern's pool touched the edge of her face and left the rest to be completed by imagination. Her gaze went to the letter, but did not linger on it. She understood, without being able to say how, that it was a thing she was not yet allowed to see again. "I'm to carry wine to the east side," she said quietly, explanation offered like a passport. "You will," he answered, his voice level, the words chosen to put distance between one truth and another. "The tray will be heavier than before." She hesitated, reading tone as a man reads a map. "If I left this room now, I would not be asked why I came," she said. "You will not be asked," he agreed. Her eyes did not search his face. They did something more dangerous. They calmed. "I did not steal it," she said. The sentence was a stone set carefully into a wall to keep it from falling. "I did not think you did," he said. "I think someone placed a burden where it would be least likely to be believed, and most likely to be carried." Her mouth opened and closed. Relief and caution argued, and left no winner. "The letter is not mine to open," she said. "It is mine to keep until it can be used." "Used for what?" "For truth," she said, and the last word came out like a thing dragged up from deep water. "That is not a small word," he said. "No," she answered, "but I am small enough to carry it." The door took a breath at her back without moving. He could hear feet on the stair above, the shuffle of a pair of shoes that believed themselves unseen. Time narrowed and expanded at once. "If you are seen with me," he began. "I am never seen," she said without vanity. "It is my skill." "That is not a skill that should be prized," he replied. "It is the only one that keeps me fed," she said. "And another person's temper short." "We can change that," he said before he knew he would. "We?" she asked. He did not answer. He took a step back that looked like reconsideration and felt like surrender to caution. "The tray," he said, and the moment closed its mouth. She moved to the stack she needed. She lifted with a care that made the bundle part of her. The lantern showed a tremor in her wrist that she quelled with attention. She did not look at the letter again. She did not try to peer through wax or time. At the threshold, she paused exactly the amount one would if one remembered something practical at the last second. "Sir," she said, a title that refused to guess at rank, "there are people in that room who will see you not as a man." "I know," he said. "I have been taught." "Then I will go," she said, "and you will not have to choose between what you were told to be and what you are." He wanted, foolishly, to ask what she thought he was. A servant with a tray passed by the open stair above, and the air changed. She left with a whisper of fabric, the room returning to its proper ownership. He could not put the letter back in his coat. He could not leave it in his hand. He returned it gently to the fold where it had hidden, as if the act could bind time for one more hour. He eased the garment into exact alignment with the one beneath it. He straightened a coil of string that would have given him away if anyone with reason to look searched for signs of search. He turned down the lantern a fraction. He put his palm flat against the table because his hands had begun to remember the market when there was nothing to hold on to there either. The corridor outside bowed with the movement of people doing their invisible work. A footman's cough carried apology to no one. A burst of laughter from the ballroom arrived like light through leaves and died before it could say anything about joy. He opened the door to allow the hallway's air to dilute the room's secrecy. He stepped out without looking like a man who had stepped into anything but thought. He made his way to the stair with that exact balance of speed and unimportance that lets a body move through a house without becoming news. He reached the landing and paused when the ball's brightness hit him again. An assault after the honest dark. He measured how much of him the room would allow back in without questions. He drew a breath that did not shake. "Highness," a voice said to his left, shaped to fit under music. The captain, not at his shoulder but within reach, because a man like that knows where reaching ends and intrusion begins. He did not make the greeting into a warning. He let the shape of the word do the work. "You were missed by no one who matters," the captain said in the language of service, "and by several who hope you matter less than you do. And by those who matter more than they think, Alejandro returned, his mouth a line that could be a smile from a distance. Eyes are everywhere, the captain said. They were made for that, he replied, and let the conversation end where it began. He did not glance toward the Duchess. He did not seek Lucia in the crowd. To do either would be to make a rope out of nothing and tie himself to it in view of the room. He stood where a man stands when he intends to be seen, and he did not move more than a fraction in any direction. Only when the dancers changed partners and the music shifted its bones did he allow himself to step slightly back into shade. He considered the letter as if it were a person present with him, demanding correct attention. He mapped how the lines and dates could be pulled into daylight without tearing the paper. He felt the shape of the room change as rumors, so quick, so light, so certain of themselves, began to collect in the corners. A prince in a servant's passage, a coin placed where it should not be, a look that lasted 1 second longer than a look like that should. "Highness," a courtier said, approaching with a smile a half-inch too eager. "The Duchess wonders whether you admired the lace display. She fears you may have missed the finest piece." "Lace is a patience I respect," he said, "and let the man carry that back like a parcel that might be a gift or might be an empty box." He let 10 minutes pass, counted by the slow dispatch of 3 dances and an interruption for wine. He moved among conversations with the grace of someone born to it and already tired of how much it cost. He offered nothing to anyone that could be used to make him less or more. He kept his mind on a folded letter hidden by cloth and temperature and need. The corridor would call him back once more, he knew. He could not leave it there indefinitely. He could not take it without turning suspicion into fact. He chose now, as the moment least likely to leave footprints. He slipped down the same stair with a rhythm altered by a hair's breadth, only so that no one could say he repeated himself. The door to the storage obeyed his hand as if it owed him. Inside, the lantern drew the same small circle. He reached for the bundle, for the fold, for the letter that could change a life if he found the courage and the proof to change the shape of a room like the one above. A breath that was not his made the air thinner. He turned, and the Duchess stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the seal in his hand and the servants' bundles at his feet. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The angle of her shoulder in the doorway made the room smaller. Alejandro let the seal press into his palm one last time, then set the letter back into its fold as carefully as one lays a sleeping child down and withdraws his hands before breath stirs. He restored the garment to its exact place, straightened the twine, turned so that the lantern found nothing guilty in his face. "Your house is thorough," he said, a simple sentence offered like the handle of a cup. "The city expects no less when I lend it my name," the Duchess replied, stepping into the circle of light without touching anything. "Some rooms, however, do not expect your presence." "I prefer to inspect what carries the weight," he answered. "Trays and ledgers make generous claims." Her gaze moved to the bundles, to the dark mark where work leaves its fingerprint, then back to him. The silence stretched to the exact point where a weaker man would have filled it. "Inspection is admirable," she said. "Curiosity is a vice if it forgets its rank." He inclined his head a fraction, making the gesture look like respect rather than agreement. "I have not forgotten it this evening." "Others will remember for you," she returned. "They already have. The staircase is not as dumb as it looks." He allowed a breath that did not change his height. "Then we are in agreement that the truth of this room should remain here." "The truth of this room," she said, tasting the phrase as if it were a new confection. "I prefer the truth of public rooms. They are more useful. They do not require explanations afterward." "Perhaps they require fewer questions beforehand," he said. "Perhaps," she conceded, a word that carried warning the way silk carries perfume. "Do enjoy the rest of your evening above ground, Highness. There are matters that deserve your lighter tread." She turned, and he moved a half step, letting the lantern bring her profile into relief. It was the face of a woman who had learned the exact cost of being underestimated and had sent the bill back, unpaid, until it was paid in full. "I shall," he said, letting the words be both promise and deflection. He followed her out, not so close as to look like a shadow, and not so far as to look like a fugitive. The stair returned the music to them in pieces. Voices braided, laughter cut and spliced itself, shoes found marble and made a different language there. On the landing, she paused long enough for the room to notice them, separately and together. "Your father would be pleased to see you so attentive to charitable detail," she said, the sentence a caress that left a welt. "My father values duty," he said. "He taught me that it begins where a man's hand meets another's burden." "Then carry yours with grace," she answered, and passed into the ballroom, her smile correcting 3 people's posture on the way. He stayed just inside the arch while his pulse slowed to a pace that would make sense to strangers. The captain slipped into his periphery, with the calm of a man who never arrives, but is always present. "You are needed near the dais," the captain murmured, making needed mean watched. "I am here," Alejandro said, and crossed the floor as if the path belonged to him and to no one. Faces welcomed him back to the world of acceptable light. He was careful with his gaze, offering it as alms to those who expected it, and not as a weapon to those who feared it. A senior advisor took that moment to materialize with a bow that was almost domestic in its familiarity. "A word, Highness," the advisor said, already choosing the spot where the conversation would look most harmless. They stood under a painting that had learned to watch without blinking. The advisor kept his voice in the range that allows gossip to rest without waking. "Our friends in Madrid," he began, letting the plural carry a shelter, "are anxious to steady the air. The announcement that has been discussed—" "It breathes," Alejandro said evenly. "Let it do so without choking." "The city is generous tonight," the advisor said, echoing the Duchess without knowing it. "It would be tasteful to reward it with certainty. An engagement clarifies thought. Certainty has a way of hiding the questions that produce it," he said. "Let us not reward the city with sleep." The advisor smiled, not unkindly. "I see that the evening agrees with your phrasing, if not with your patience." "Patience is the luxury of those who have time to give away," he answered. "We have only the time we dare to use." The advisor inclined his head, content to have said the words he was told to say. He stepped back just enough to hint at retreat without surrender. Lucia passed the edge of the crowd again, a shape in duty. He did not look at her. He adjusted his cuff, examined the lace he had been summoned to admire, allowed the Duchess to see him admire it along the exact angle that made politeness indistinguishable from praise. He measured how much the room had guessed and how little it truly knew. When the hour allowed it, he took his leave with the simplicity of a man who must be elsewhere. He stepped into his carriage with the knowledge that there would be ink waiting at the palace, and that it would carry more gravity than music could counter. The Alcazar received him with stone that had cooled, and a hush that took itself seriously. A lamp waited on his desk, flame trimmed to a point that felt intentional. The steward had arranged 2 packets squarely, one atop the other, as if a perfectly even weight could conceal what each contained. He broke the first seal and read what he already knew it would say. The language made certainty look like modesty. It proposed dates and listed obligations as if they were favors he would grant himself. It spoke of alliances the way a poet might speak of spring. It used his name as if it owned it. He set it aside. He broke the second seal and saw fewer words and more teeth. It couched threat in a low concern for stability. It suggested gently that the city had recently survived enough storms not to need one more from inside its walls. It did not mention a maid. It did not need to. He rested his fingers on the table's edge and let the wood take the pressure he could not put anywhere else. He felt the fact of the storage room reach him from the back of his mind, carrying with it the weight of paper that had not been read and the possibility of reading it wrong. He rang for the captain and was grateful that the man had the sense to appear as if summoned by thought. "Archives," Alejandro said, and the word opened a route through the night. "Tonight," the captain answered, not as a question. "If walls are closed, open them with promises," he said. "No coins that smell of hurried fear. Use the name of the charity before mine. The regimental records," the captain said, already parsing shelves in his head. "The crest," Alejandro said, drawing it in the air with 2 lines, enough for a soldier. "The year that learned to whisper." The captain nodded. "There is a clerk who prefers the respect of the uniform to the noise of politics. He will help us if we let him pretend he does it for order, not us." "Let him have the story that does him most credit," Alejandro said. "Bring me the spine, not just the skin." "And the girl?" the captain asked, letting the question sound practical while placing it where truth belonged. "She is not safe where she is," Alejandro said. "If the Duchess wished to, she could pluck her out of that house like a fruit she disapproves of." "There is another place," the captain offered. "Under the cloak of the hospital's laundry. The cathedral signs the records. No noblewoman argues with linens that serve God." "Do it," Alejandro said. "Make it look like economy and benevolence having a late-night conversation. I will sign what gives it tone." The captain inclined his head, a simple angle that said he understood in which order to move men and paper. He withdrew with the speed of an hour beginning. Alone, Alejandro drew the dossier he had begun, a thin stack that would need to become thick to stand up without shaking. He wrote Lucia's name at the top of a page and added nothing else beneath it. The blank below looked like a promise, not an absence. He let the ink dry while he walked the room. The steps outlined his choice in the quiet as surely as words could. He thought of the Duchess in the doorway, of the advisor near the painting, of the letter folded into cloth. He thought of a stain on a napkin that had seemed too small to count, and had counted more than the people who pointed at it. A footfall at his door brought him back into the room. The captain's return carried the smell of streets and closed cabinets. "We woke a clerk," the captain said without apology. "We let him believe order required his hand tonight. He liked that." "The regiment?" Alejandro asked. "Disbanded," the captain replied. "Paper remains, names remain. The narrative lifts its skirts where it gets muddy." "Which mud?" he said. "The kind supplied in barrels and signed for with sighs," the captain said. "Your soldiers' supplies. Irregularities at a time when honesty looked like sabotage to someone who had a better use for the numbers. The adjutant who wrote the complaint was promoted. The man who refused to sign was dismissed. The signature on your letter belongs to a colonel who left the army with his spine intact. He lives near the river and prefers quiet." "He will remember," Alejandro said. "He will if we ask him to," the captain answered. "Shall we wake him to remind him of his duty to truth, or let him sleep and choose kinder words at dawn?" "Wake him," Alejandro said after a moment. "Let him speak before the world reminds him what it costs." The captain inclined his head again. The room moved around his efficiency. He was what men like Alejandro paid the price of power to have, loyalty with judgment. He left for the river with a corporal who knew how to knock, so a door did not feel invaded. Alejandro exhaled and reached for fresh paper. He began the outline of a petition that would make elders clear their throats and look at their shoes, and then back at him. He wrote it in language that did not accuse, because accusation hardens ears. He made it simple, because truth hides behind curtains of complexity when it is frightened. He asked for a review of a record in the name of the Crown's interest in the accuracy of its own memory. He paused at the last sentence and let it hang, unwilling to end badly. He set the pen down and stepped out into the arcaded garden to rinse his eyes in water and citrus. The fountain ticked the hours with droplets. The air smelled of orange trees, as if the city had decided to make a case for mercy by perfume. His mind rehearsed the shape of a choice that had already been made, and now waited to be spoken in the right place, with the right number of witnesses. The door from the chapel opened softly, a hinge that believed in magic. The Duchess did not enter. but her echo did. A chaplain in a plain cassock crossed the corridor with her at his side. Their steps matched and polite. "Your Highness," the chaplain said, as if greeting anyone else would be heresy. He bowed with the humility of a man who has seen too much pride in his profession to pretend he is exempt. "Father," Alejandro said, giving the title its due and no more. "You are up late for a man who preaches about rest." "The soul often refuses the body its example," the chaplain murmured. "We spoke of order, of the relief people find when the structure is strong enough to carry their smaller sorrows." "The structure cracks when it cannot feel the weight it pretends to carry," Alejandro said. "Tell your sermons that." The Duchess smiled, a slow, precise thing. "I told Father Luis that your mind would be sharp tonight," she said. "It is sharper than is convenient." "Convenience has never been a virtue," he answered. "It is a tool, and tools should hang in their proper place." "Do place this one well," she said, letting a soul of steel gild itself with charm. "The city sleeps better when your choices do not keep it awake." "I will try not to disturb its dreams," he replied, and let her go with the chaplain into the part of the palace where candles are counted like blessings. He remained with the fountain and the orange trees until the night answered itself with the pale preface of morning. He returned inside to find the captain waiting with a new leaf added to the dossier. "The colonel," the captain said, "remembers the man you asked about. He remembers him as stubborn in the way we like to call loyal when we have already chosen to win with truth rather than speed." "Can he put that memory on paper?" Alejandro asked. "He already did," the captain replied. He wrote that the requisitions were demanded at a time when the stores did not contain what the numbers pretended. He wrote that the man refused to sign what could not be delivered. He wrote that a certain adjutant's career began with that refusal. "Names?" Alejandro said. "They are in the margin," the captain answered. "He writes like a soldier, direct and careless of ornament." Alejandro took the page and read the spare lines until they sank into him like grit that would not wash away. He folded it once and slid it into the dossier beside the petition. "Send the order," he said. "Transfer Lucia from the house that has used her to the laundry that will protect her by pretending to use her more. Make sure it reads as charity correcting waste." "It will be delivered before the house wakes," the captain said. "The mistress will learn to be grateful for economies she did not ask for." "And the Duchess?" Alejandro asked. "She will hear of it anyway," the captain said. "Better from us as an act of prudence than from the street as an act of defiance." "Nothing about this is defiance," Alejandro said. "It is merely remembering that justice has a voice even when it is out of fashion." "Some will call it defiance," the captain warned gently. "They are free to call it a different name," he said. "I will call it what it is, and stand in front of it when they throw whatever they choose to throw." He dismissed the captain with a nod and took up the pen again. He wrote the order with language designed to make a steward smile and a mistress sigh with relief. He signed where the line required it and pressed his signet into wax with a steadiness he had earned by not pretending steadiness existed without cost. When the messenger left by a side gate, the eastern sky was the color of paper before ink decides what it is. The palace began its morning chores, the guard changing without flourish, the kitchen lighting its fires like tiny battles won without casualties, the endless sweep of a broom that keeps time honest. The house on the river received the sealed instruction with the startle of a woman woken by a knock she cannot ignore. The mistress read what was in front of her and found herself grateful for the neat way the words lifted a problem she had not yet admitted she had. The senior maid took the news with the face of someone who knows how quickly a fall can be disguised as a step taken by choice. Lucia heard her name spoken in the courtyard, and her body took half a step backward before she made it stop. The senior maid read the order aloud to those who needed to hear it. Each syllable clicked into place like a stitch. "You will report to the charitable laundry by mid-morning," the senior maid said, making mid-morning sound natural, not urgent. "You will be paid by the laundry, seconded here only when the schedule permits. It is an advancement, she added, as if adding a bit of sugar to bitter tea. Lucia nodded because nodding makes other people feel less guilty. Yes, she said. Thank you. It is work, the senior maid replied. It should be respected for that. Lucia folded the apron she had just put on and put on another with the same movements. She touched the crimson handkerchief where it lay, clean now, in the corner of her palette, then shut the curtain, as if to keep the square of color safe while she crossed the city. She did not see who had noticed the small gesture. She did not need to. Alejandro, in his study, held the petition that would force a room full of men to say the word error without choking on it. He read it as if he were the one who would be asked to refuse it, looking for weakness the way a general looks for soft ground. He found what he could strengthen, made the lines firmer, took out the phrase that apologized unnecessarily, added a single sentence that made mercy sound like common sense. He sealed it when the bells began their first call. The ring's impression sat in the wax, like a decision no longer waiting to be made. He did not close his eyes. He did not ask for pardon. He called for the courier who carried petitions that could not be lost, and gave him the folded paper with a weight that had very little to do with wax. When the door closed and the quiet returned, he allowed himself into the garden one more time. The light was honest day now. The fountain played the same tune as it had in the night, but the air heard it differently. He breathed, and beneath the breath sat the understanding that the hours ahead would ask him to be the man he had been careful not to be, a man who chooses in public and does not flinch when choice costs. He found that his shoulders did not ache under that knowledge. They steadied. He turned back toward the work that would make the choice visible. The petition was no longer in his hand. The order was on its way down a street that would carry it to a door that would carry it to a life that had earned relief without asking. The morning moved on around him with its own sure foot. He led it, and he did not ask it to hurry. The summons reached him before the ink on his petition had fully hardened. A clerk with careful shoes and the face of a man who liked rules stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, eyes disciplined to the level of the prince's shoulder. "The council is in session, Highness," the clerk said, as if stating the weather. "They will hear the petition now, while the city's dignitaries are gathered." "Now," Alejandro repeated, not as surprise but as acceptance. He lifted the dossier, its weight modest and decisive. "Lead the way." They crossed corridors that had trained footsteps to be serious. The air smelled of wax and old cedar. A steward watched him pass and measured the distance between respect and worry. Bells made a soft braid of sound high above the tiles, retreating into the arches like birds. At the threshold of the Hall of Ambassadors, the captain appeared without appearing to come from any direction. He took his place a pace behind and to the side, where a man can intercept a blow no one intends to admit they meant to land. "Everything is arranged," the captain said under his breath. "Document from the colonel is in the dossier. The clerk will call the number before the old names can wake." Alejandro nodded once. He stepped into a hall that had taught power to stare back. The mosaics held their geometries with the patient certainty of patterns that survive dynasties. Sunlight poured through the carved windows and broke into small gold storms on the floor. Councillors took their seats with a rustle that echoed from polished surfaces. The chaplain sat where conscience could be seen, but not allowed to speak unless consulted. The Duchess had chosen a place that allowed her to catch both his face and the room's reaction in a single glance. He did not look for her. He looked instead for the place where justice would have to stand up without props. He found it in the simple table set for petitions, a plank of wood, and an inkwell like any other. He moved forward and placed the dossier there, his hand steady. The council president, no title was spoken. Roles do not need introductions in rooms like this. Tapped a finger once, and the clerk's voice lifted. "Case number 71, the clerk said. Petition for review of dismissal from the army, year. He spoke the year that people preferred to mouth without pushing air, and the room felt the past step in and sit down. Alejandro let silence find its level. "Highness," the president said, his tone dry as a ledger, You requested this hearing. I did, he replied, because the memory of the crown is an instrument. It should be kept in tune. A few heads tipped, uncertain whether the metaphor meant trouble. The petition concerns an officer dismissed for irregularities in supply during a period of strain, he went on, voice even, pace deliberate. I ask that the record be amended if it can be shown the dismissal was the result of pressure applied to a man who chose truth over convenience. The word convenience landed like a small stone in deep water. He opened the dossier and laid out the chain. Requisition orders that did not match warehouse inventories. Signatures that appeared on documents after hours when no one signed anything but the register at the guard gate. A promotion, granted with unusual speed to the adjutant who had written the accusation. I present also a statement from the colonel in command at the time, he said, lifting the page in that officer's angular hand. He remembers the dismissed officer as stubborn in the way we later like to call loyal when victory allows it. He confirms that the man refused to sign what could not be delivered. He confirms that the accusation followed that refusal like smoke follows fire. He did not read with heat. He read like a man stepping the perimeter of a field he had to plow himself. These facts, he concluded, cannot give back the years taken. They can restore the truth of the public record. They can stop a rumor from doing the work of a verdict. The president leaned back, letting the bench speak for him. The chaplain's fingers paused on his beads, then moved, then stopped. Do you name the officer? A counselor asked, though the name was already in the papers in front of him. I do, Alejandro said, and said it, the sound of it unadorned. Morales. The name joined the hall, stood next to the mosaics, decided to remain. The Duchess did not twitch. She watched with the composed interest of someone measuring a sail she might someday need to use. The record, the president said, will be cross-checked with the regimental ledgers. It has been, Alejandro answered, and placed the copy of the relevant page in front of the man. By your clerk, who prefers accuracy to rumor. His initials are there. The clerk's ears colored. Accuracy, when praised, always feels like a secret discovered. The president read without folding his face. He passed the page to the counselor on his left, who passed it without comment to the one on his right. Paper traveled the long table like a disciplined thought. The Crown does not enjoy admitting error, the president said at last. It enjoys it less to keep one, Alejandro replied, tone mild as weather. The officer's honor should be restored. The benefits owed to his family should be paid. The stain belongs where the ink came from, not where it landed. The chaplain coughed. It does the city good, he said into the careful air, to see that the weight of power can be used to lift, not only to press. That is a sermon, the president said without warmth. It is a fact, the chaplain corrected, matching dryness with dryness. The room held its breath. It let it out. The president's pen scratched a few words. He did not look noble. He looked burdened and dutiful. The council agrees to amend the record, he announced. Let the officer's name be cleared. Let the treasury pay what is owed to his household. Let the document be entered in the book that does not burn. A soft ripple moved through the hall. Not applause, not even assent, but the sound a conscience makes when it realizes it has overslept and is running to catch up. Alejandro inclined his head, claiming no victory. He had not come to be praised. He had come to make the room say a word the room avoided. The president dipped his pen again. Is this the only matter you wish to bring while the city listens? He asked, curiosity wrapped in protocol. It is not, Alejandro said. He let his gaze rest, an inch to the side of the Duchess's face. I would state, while the hall is full, that I will not proceed with any engagement arranged to secure alliances unless I can do so with a conscience that is at peace. I am not averse to duty. I refuse to be its excuse. The sentence fell into the space between the council table and the mosaics and laid itself down there. You could hear the adjustment. People do not like having their furniture moved, but they learn to navigate around it when the table is heavy enough. The Duchess lowered her eyes, as if counting her thoughts. She lifted them with the calm of a woman who never leaves a room to argue a point she can win by staying. "Your conscience is an ornament when worn at the right length," she said softly to the man beside her, voice never meant to carry and carrying anyway. "Let us hope the chain does not catch on anything." "It will catch on what it must," Alejandro said, without turning his head. The president closed the book with a sound like the end of a measure in a piece of music. "This session is concluded," he said. "Let the city return to its business with one fewer lie between its teeth." Chairs slid. Robes whispered. A murmur rose, astonishment in some throats, relief in others. The chaplain made a small sign that did not belong to any one church. The clerk drew a line in a ledger that admitted and forgave at once. Alejandro stepped back from the table. He did not look toward the dais or toward the door by which the important leave. He moved instead along the shadow of a colonnade where servants and tradesmen waited for the order to carry out the work of the day. He kept his head level, his hands easy at his sides. He let himself belong to the part of the hall that doesn't learn the names of men's shoes. Lucia had stood there from the first minute, her back straight against the cold stone, her hands folded because folded hands are less likely to shake. The transfer to the charitable laundry had kept her away from the house's storms and placed her, today, in service to the hall itself. Her apron was clean, her cap firm. She had tucked the crimson handkerchief into the pocket of her dress before leaving, along with a thread and a needle, because going without felt like going without breath. She had watched the ceremony with the care of someone reading a map that might lead either to a door or to a wall. The councillors' faces looked to her like polished plates. The Duchess held herself as if all gravity had been born in her spine and leant out on her terms. The chaplain's hands told another story than his mouth. The prince, she did not say the word in her head, not even there, stood and spoke as if words could carry weight without shouting. When the president named Morales, her stomach forgot how to be quiet, and then remembered. She pinned her heels to the floor, afraid that if she lifted them even once she would float, and the fall after would break her. The moments that followed had the softness of dreams and the sharpness of real blades. He laid out dates. He set one small truth after another on the table, like a man teaching a child to walk the right way around a hole. He did not exaggerate. He did not trim. He spoke of paper as if it had blood. When the decision came, amended, restored, paid, she did not smile. She felt the change slip over her shoulders like a cloak someone else had been wearing and finally remembered to return. She let out a breath in such silence that it could not be seen, only felt by the body that had held it too long. He did not look at her. He looked at no one as he moved along the edge of the hall toward the servants' arch. He stopped a pace away, where formality turns into simple human distance. "Senora Morales," a steward said on his way past, because the title could be used now without irony. The word pricked her skin. She did not look to see who had spoken. Pride can be undone by the wrong glance. Alejandro paused in front of her. Not as a prince performing magnanimity. As a man who has finished a task and found himself where the consequence of it stands. "Miss," he said. The one syllable held neutrality like a careful tray. "Sir," she answered, matching the weight. He did not ask if she had heard. The hall had heard. The sound still lived in the air. "I cannot return years," he said. "I can return names." "You returned a spine," she said, and there was no tremor in the sentence. "The rest will find its way to him where he is." His mouth made the small movement of a man accepting thanks without claiming it. He drew from inside his coat a folded copy of the council's declaration, the ink hardly dry, and held it as if it could bruise. He tilted it toward her. "For your keeping," he said. "For my father's name," she corrected quietly. "For that," he agreed. She lifted her hand. He laid the page in it. The paper warmed at once. Skin is immediate that way. She let her fingers curve until the declaration was safe, until nothing short of force could take it. He could have stopped there. Protocol wanted him to. He did not. With the other hand, he reached, not to her face, not safe, not to her sleeve, too public, but to the pocket where the corner of red showed like a stubborn thought. He touched the silk with a restraint that made heat unnecessary. He drew it free the inch that kept it hidden. He folded it once, simple as breathing, and set it in her open palm on top of the paper, a square of color on a square of law. The world narrowed. The hall, with all its eyes pulled back like a tide. "Keep it," he said, voice low enough to belong to only them. "Let it carry what today means when the room is empty." "It carried me here," she said, the truth plain. "It will carry you further," he answered. His fingers did not cover hers. They hovered, then withdrew, a degree of motion that registered like a vow. The captain stood at a distance that allowed seeing without witnessing. The chaplain appeared interested suddenly in the pattern on a nearby pillar. The Duchess's gaze, precise as a needle, reached them and rested, not as a blade but as a calculation, already absorbing this new element into a larger sum. Alejandro took one step back. It looked like respect and felt like reluctance. "There will be talk," she said, not warning him, warning herself. "There is always talk," he replied. "I propose a different rumor." "What rumor?" she asked. "That a man of rank remembered what a man is," he said, and this time the corner of his mouth allowed itself to soften. "And that a woman refused to listen to anyone who tried to tell her how much she was allowed to matter." Her chest lifted with a breath that tasted less of soap and more of air. "Rumors fade," she said. "Then I will repeat it," he returned, "in rooms like this, if I must." She looked at the page in her hand, the seal catching the light. She looked at the handkerchief, its red rich as heart's blood. She lifted her eyes to his and did not look away. "Sir," she said, "because there are words that do not belong in public, even when they are true." "Thank you." He inclined his head. "For what?" "For seeing," she said. He almost smiled again, not because the word pleased him, but because he recognized the exact point at which a life begins to reassemble itself with new joints. The hall began to find its ordinary shape again. The scrape of a chair, the whisper of a robe, the dull thud of a book being closed. The president rose and left by the door that mattered. The Duchess did not move. Her thought finished themselves and were stored for later use. Alejandro stepped to the side. He did not offer his arm, he could not. He did not leave at once. He did not need to. He stood where he could be counted, but not claimed. Lucia slipped the handkerchief and the paper into the pocket against her apron, where the heartbeat keeps time for memories. The captain approached just close enough for his voice to belong to no one but them. "Highness," he said, the word as neutral as a glass, "the city has already heard." "Good," Alejandro said. "Let it carry the right song for once." The chaplain passed with a nod that contained no sermon at all. "Justice is unmusical until it is done," he said, almost to himself. "Then even the stone knows the tune." The Duchess's shadow arrived before she did. She stood not 2 paces away, the angle of her head a lesson from some older court. "Your moment was well played," she said, cordial as a hostess. "You have made a promise that will not let you forget it is there." "I have," he said. "I intend not to." She looked at Lucia with the consideration one gives a fact that refuses to reduce. "You bear yourself neatly," the Duchess said. "No one can take that from you now." "No, Your Grace," Lucia answered, the words balanced. The Duchess smiled without showing teeth. "Let us see what the city becomes when it has to live with men who do not make it simple." She moved away, dress whispering, and took with her the last of the room's claim to define what had happened. Alejandro faced the captain. "There will be petitions to answer," he said. "Letters to blunt. A mountain of yes that means no, and no that should be yes." "I have ink," the captain said, "and a spine." "You'll need both," Alejandro replied. He turned back to Lucia for the final thing that remained. It required no witnesses and had no script. If you wish to stand in the sun today, he said, there is enough of it in the courtyard. I work, she said, but her mouth betrayed a line that was not quite a smile. Work is better with light. Then that is settled, he said. She dipped her head, that small, ancient bow that acknowledges both worlds and refuses to drown in either. He stepped aside to make a path. She passed him, the paper and the silk safe where warmth could keep them, and went toward the arch that led to the courtyard, where orange trees were already deciding to scent the air, as if the city had always smelled like forgiveness. He watched her go, not as a prince owning an outcome, but as a man permitted to witness what he had made possible. The hall returned to its usual gravity behind him. The mosaics held their promises. The city outside breathed, and for once its breath did not sound like a sigh, but like a beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.